What's up, peepo? It's ya boy back again from the dead. Due to the most recent One Piece chapter, a lot of people started questioning Whitebeard and brought up inconsistencies and concerns with his character. Originally I was planning to make one tweet about this, and then I decided to do a Twitter thread, but after rereading more of the story, I thought that the epiphany I got can only be adequately communicated in a video. So please give me a chance to show you and recontextualize Whitebeard's character in a way you've probably never seen before. Let's get into it. Since we found out that Odin was acquainted with Whitebeard, most people wondered why Whitebeard didn't go save Odin and Wano after he was killed by Kaido. In the latest chapter, chapter 999, it was somewhat addressed and has led to many discussions to where some claim Whitebeard's character became inconsistent when taking what we know about him into consideration, while others rebuttal with that it was because Odin is dead and Ace was alive, hence the difference in approach. Well, I'll start by saying both are wrong. Half wrong to be exact. Allow me to take you into the inner psyche of the man known as Whitebeard. And explain to you how Whitebeard fooled me. You. And the entire One Piece community for over a decade. Many people start by bringing up what Garp and Buggy said about Whitebeard, that he always avenges his nakama, as evidence that Whitebeard betrayed his principles by not saving Odin. What most of us didn't notice, however, was the intricate plan that we were played into. The recurring theme of perception versus reality is often brought up as justification to why Whitebeard isn't exactly like the rumors, but that wasn't satisfying to me, so I went to my One Piece lab, put on my Oda's angel wings and did my research. Here is the ultimate revelation and conclusion that I've reached. Whitebeard is a liar. Yes, you heard me right, but before you click off, allow me to explain why it's not what you think it is. You see, the Garp and Buggy comments weren't perception. That was the reality Whitebeard himself fabricated. We've heard the ironclad rule on Whitebeard's ship many times, but I dare say that Whitebeard himself doesn't believe in it. In chapter 434, Shanks meets Whitebeard in order to convince him to stop Ace. This part is really important, so pay attention. Whitebeard responds to Shanks by saying that, I quote, "He killed a nakama, violating the ultimate law. I treat any idiot I let on my ship like my own son. Now where would the soul of my murdered son go?" Whitebeard justifies the rule by saying that Thatch's soul can't rest until he is avenged, that it is Whitebeard's responsibility to teach that lesson to Blackbeard and anyone else who dares to violate this law. This soul part is important because later on, when we see Thatch died, Ace repeated the exact same words that Whitebeard said to Shanks while Whitebeard himself brushed it off in the first place. I quote, "What's going to become of poor Thatch's soul if I just let his killer go?" And that was the first clear instance to where Ace fell for Whitebeard's lie. However, Whitebeard intentionally lied to Shanks, and partly to Ace. You see, he himself doesn't believe in this because in that same chapter, Chapter 552, when Ace was outraged upon learning Thatch was killed, as mentioned before, Whitebeard, in a completely calm and relaxed demeanor, advises Ace not to go and give it a rest. This was his son that just died. Yet, he said the exact same thing that Shanks said, which ended up enraging Whitebeard. Now compare these two side by side. This version of Whitebeard was the one that just learned of Thatch's death, and the other was several weeks if not months later. Completely different characters. On surface level it would seem like inconsistency, but it's far more nuanced. Do you know what the difference is? The audience. In the first one, Whitebeard is talking to his own crew, while in the second, he's talking to Shanks, who is considered an enemy. And likewise by Shanks. Whitebeard has always deliberately kept up a facade in front of others, especially to the enemy, that anyone who touches his crew will suffer painfully regardless of who they are. If you're not convinced yet, at the start of Marineford, Ace apologized to Whitebeard for running out on his own. And before he could even declare to everyone at Marineford that Whitebeard told him not to run after Blackbeard, Whitebeard cuts him off by saying that, as he recalls it, Whitebeard himself was the one that ordered Ace to go. And Marco repeats the lie by saying he heard it with his very own ears. Both bluntly lying to his face. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the pieces should be falling in place and you should be able to start seeing the bigger trick at play here. Whitebeard was a genius leader. The next line seemed to be directed to Ace, but in reality it was to all of Marineford and the entire world that was watching via broadcast. They were not just talking to Ace. He declares that everyone in the whole wide ocean ought to know just what happens to any fool who lays a hand on one of their crew. There was no reason for Whitebeard to lie directly to Ace's face about what happened that day, when they both know exactly what happened. There's only one reason in fact. Notice the recurring factor in all of this. It was once again in the presence of enemies. Whitebeard made sure to continue this lie and spread this rule even at this stage to any and everyone in the ocean, be it Marines or pirates. But what's the point? One might ask. Why would Whitebeard be so shameless to lie to others about himself? Well, dear viewer, you see, the answer was always clear as day. In chapter 233, Ace hops on Buggy's ship and falls asleep. As his crew was about to kill Ace, Oda masterfully displayed the power of Whitebeard's intricate lie in full effect. Buggy yells at his own crew telling them they are absolutely forbidden to touch Whitebeard's crew, no matter the circumstance, because Whitebeard will come and kill them. This was the whole purpose of this intricate lie. It was to prevent people from putting hands on his children, and believe it or not, it worked. Due to Whitebeard's name and his self-fabricated rumor, people did in fact not touch his crew purely out of fear of him. If you're not convinced yet, in Marineford, Sengoku himself declares that they couldn't arrest Ace because he was a crewmate and under the protection of Whitebeard himself. They feared him. Evident by the preparation of the entire world's marine and warlord military force just to be able to kill one single crewmate of his. Still not convinced yet? In chapter 529, Jimbei reveals that just by declaring Fishman Island under his protection, he was immediately able to stop the endless stream of pirates and slave traders, finally achieving stable peace. Oda has demonstrated the power of Whitebeard's name and his well-maintained rumor numerous times leading up to Marineford. Now this is absolutely not to say that he didn't care about his family. Whitebeard will absolutely and undeniably not forgive anyone who hurts his family, but he was far more intelligent and level-headed than the indiscriminate monster his facade made him out to be. Don't forget Whitebeard was always complaining about the recklessness of the new generation, and he was the actual tactician going head-to-head with Sengoku during Marineford. I believe he was much smarter and more reasonable than we previously gave him credit for. A common misconception is often brought up that Whitebeard's mistake was his pride. Ace also once said that if he doesn't find Teach, it would bring shame to Whitebeard and tarnish his pride. Some have also brought up that Whitebeard rejected Shanks' advice because he didn't want to admit Shanks was right. Whitebeard, however, was never prideful or arrogant to begin with. That was the result of his facade. In reality, he was a soft-hearted man. The first instance we see of this is after being stabbed by Squardo. He didn't even fight back or set an example and merely forgave and hugged him. He didn't care about how weak he looked. Crocodile immediately criticized him for this. How could have the proud and almighty Whitebeard become so weak? This was not the Whitebeard that he knew and lost to. Whitebeard responds by saying, I quote, "Weak? Give me a break, crocodile brat. I'm only one man with one heart. They call me a demon and a monster, but I won't always be the strongest one out there." Power scaling aside, this could absolutely be taken as Whitebeard admitting to his more human side. And the cherry on top was that this was his internal thoughts and he made sure not to voice them out. Instead, his next line out loud was a battle cry to rally up his forces and charge in. Masterfully maintaining his monster deity image even at his weakest moment. The ultimate confirmation to Whitebeard's true thoughts was when his crew gathered behind him saying they will protect Whitebeard's pride. He very quietly mutters to himself that all you idiots care too much about that. Which is also an indirect reference to the actions of Ace, who was fired up to protect Whitebeard's pride, when he himself in reality didn't care about that, as it was just his image and not something Ace should truly take to heart. It was never a matter of pride for Whitebeard. In simple terms, this legendary man was in fact two separate people. Whitebeard the Almighty, and Edward Newgate, the father, the public persona, and the private, true version of himself. Shanks probably also understood this because interestingly, Shanks is the exact same. When Ace wanted to meet Shanks, he menacingly questioned Ace on why he wanted to see him while clenching his blade ready for battle, but as soon as Luffy was mentioned, he completely switched character and became the true Shanks that we know and love. Like it or not, pirates with things to protect must uphold an image, otherwise the things they love will come to harm. Recall what happened to Luffy in Chapter 1, once the bandits no longer feared Shanks in the bar scene. Now, with all that being said, after getting a much-needed insight into the complexities of Whitebeard's character, or should I say, Edward Newgate, let's return to Odin. In chapter 999, Ace tried to go and defeat Kaido, but Whitebeard stopped him forcefully, which was interesting, since despite not wanting Ace to go after Blackbeard, he didn't fight Ace over it and quietly let him go. So why the inconsistency? What made Thatch different from Odin? Wasn't Odin a brother to Whitebeard? These questions have been asked by many, and I'll present you my interpretation, which convinced me why he made the decisions he did. Him not forcefully stopping Ace like with Odin was a rare instance in which Whitebeard let his emotions take over. While it may sound convenient at first, it's easy to forget that he has already forcefully denied Ace to fight Kaido once before, which frustrated Ace. Doing so again with Blackbeard when Ace's friend was just killed would have been too harsh on him. It would be the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. So all he could do was try to convince Ace not to go, which Ace recklessly didn't listen to. Perhaps this was also why he felt responsible for Ace's failure, and why he was irritated with Shanks meddling in his internal affairs, as he knew nothing about Ace and his past. So why didn't Whitebeard go to Odin? While Odin was a precious brother-like figure to Whitebeard, there were three factors that defined his decision in this, which is surprisingly consistent when compared to the other two cases with Thatch and Ace. The three criteria Whitebeard uses is as follows. 1. The strength of the enemy. 2. Whether the crewmate is alive or not. And 3. Which is the often underlooked one, is how public it was. In the case of Thatch, the incident was relatively private as it happened internally in the Whitebeard pirates. The crewmate was already dead. And finally, Blackbeard was an unknown power that couldn't be gauged properly. In every factor that we talked about, it made it unreasonable to gather forces to chase Blackbeard and make the incident more risky than it should be. Regardless of how painful it was for Whitebeard, the correct decision was to de-escalate the situation. And that was the decision he chose. Although Ace didn't listen for reasons already discussed. Needless to say, if Whitebeard instantly got his hands on Blackbeard, you can bet he would do his best to kill that guy on sight. But we know that wasn't the case in the beginning, and we've seen the unfortunate circumstances in which they met again. In the case of Odin, the same three criteria apply. Odin has already died several years ago. To an extremely strong pirate. In an extremely isolated country. The outside world never knew about what happened to Odin. There was minimal risk to the well-being of his crew if he didn't act, and maximum risk if he did act. He loved Odin to death, but he was not reckless like Ace. He never was. Everything he said and did was always calculated. Even him ripping out the life support before the war was so his enemies don't pity him, and so he can protect his children by maintaining the image of power. Now hold on, Jazzer, you may say. But Whitebeard went to Marineford and risked the lives of his crew anyways, so why is he playing favorites? And I reply. Aside from the obvious Ace was alive and Odin was dead answer, the ultimate deciding factor on whether he should wage total war was how Ace was going to be executed. It was in Marine headquarters with the entire military force broadcasted to the entire world. If Ace was already killed somewhere else in secret by an admiral or another Yonko, I don't believe he would have rallied all his forces and went to war to the same degree he did. But because it was a public execution, they were almost taunting and testing if Whitebeard would show up. The Garp comment was specifically misguided because of the facade that Whitebeard maintained throughout all these years. Now let me pose this question to you. What do you think would happen if the Marines were able to execute a top commander of Whitebeard, in full display, without Whitebeard lifting a finger? It would completely destroy each and every effort he made to protect his other sons from everyone else. This wasn't just Ace about to be executed. This was his entire family and all the islands he had under his protection at stake. We know Whitebeard loves his sons equally, and he concluded that it was best to go all or nothing in this war. Oda has clearly demonstrated the cracks in Whitebeard's reputation before Marineford, where the people were skeptical if he would show up or not since he hasn't done anything for many years. And laying dormant in such an enormous event would only reinforce their doubts, putting his entire plan of fear-mongering in jeopardy. And by extension putting everyone at risk, even down to the normal civilians of Fishman Island. This was the burden of responsibility that Whitebeard had over his crew, and everyone aboard his ship understood that, with the exception of Ace. And that was probably what Marco meant with the weight of having the Whitebeard cross. You're no longer acting alone, and have a family to take into consideration with your actions. So to conclude, Whitebeard's actions on a personal level and on the world stage are carefully evaluated. Not perfect by any means, but nowhere near as impulsive and raging as the legend he fabricated and what we believed him to be. He was not only a pirate, but also a political figure in the world stage with many enemies lying dormant waiting for their chance. That's what comes with great power and influence. Ignoring Ace's execution would be akin to, say, China or Russia assassinating the President of the United States on camera, and the US not retaliating in the slightest, just to avoid more casualties. It's not that simple. In the end, the basic joke is to say Whitebeard was a fraud. That he was too scared to lose his family even at the cost of his pride. And in a way, he somewhat was. Akainu immediately registered this after they all started running away after saving Ace. And not finishing off the Marines as they claim they will, to anyone that hurts their crew. Of course this angered Ace, because his adoptive father has just thrown this hard-built image away, to save all their lives by sacrificing his. And the scene that follows speaks for itself.
親父は俺たちに行き場所をくれたんだ。お前に親父の偉大さの何がわかる。
人間は正しく生きなけりゃ生きる価値なし。お前らゴロツキどもの海賊なんぞに生きる場所はいらん。
やめろ。
白ひげは敗北者として死ぬ。大宮山の大将にあつらえ向きじゃろうが。
白ひげはこの時代を作った大海賊だ。俺を救ってくれた人をバカにするんじゃねえ。この時代の名は白ひげだ。
白ひげもそれを親父と慕うお前らも結局同じ敗北者じゃけ。
After saving Ace, Whitebeard simply decided that sticking to fight, and continuing this untainted legendary status would only bring needless sacrifice. This latest chapter has only reinforced this reality. This facade was already in place long ago and its goal was to protect his crew and people for as long as possible. And regardless of what anyone says, it fooled everyone perfectly. You and me included, and all the other readers. But ultimately, in the very end, it wasn't the riches he cared about. It wasn't the fame itself, nor the land.
Hi, Newgate!
ガキの頃から欲しかったものがある。
お、あるのか。教えてみろ。
家族。
And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the failed legend that Akainu saw known as Whitebeard. And simultaneously the successful father, that Ace saw and knew, as Edward Newgate.
One Piece は実在する。
Thanks for watching.